Buckingham Palace is the London residence and principal workplace of the monarchy of the United Kingdom. Located in the City of Westminster, the palace is often at the centre of state occasions and royal hospitality. It has been a focus for the British people at times of national rejoicing. Originally known as Buckingham House, the building which forms the core of today's palace was a large townhouse built for the Duke of Buckingham in 1703 on a site which had been in private ownership for at least 150 years. It was subsequently acquired by King George III in 1761 as a private residence for Queen Charlotte and was known as the Queen's House. During the 19th century it was enlarged, principally by architects John Nash and Edward Blore, who formed three wings around a central courtyard. Buckingham Palace finally became the official royal palace of the British monarch on the accession of Queen Victoria in 1837. The last major structural additions were made in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including the east front, which contains the well-known balcony on which the royal family traditionally congregates to greet crowds outside. However, the palace chapel was destroyed by a German bomb during World War II. The Queen's Gallery was built on the site and opened to the public in 1962 to exhibit works of art from the royal collection. The original early 19th century interior designs, many of which still survive, included widespread use of brightly coloured scagliola and blue and pink lapis, on the advice of Sir Charles Long. King Edward VII oversaw a partial redecoration in a Bella Permelpo cream and gold colour scheme. Many smaller reception rooms are furnished in the Chinese Regency style with furniture and fittings brought from the Royal Pavilion at Brighton and from Carlton House. The Buckingham Palace Garden is the largest private garden in London. The state rooms, used for official and state entertaining, are open to the public each year for most of August and September, as part of the palace's summer opening. History. Site. In the Middle Ages, the site of the future palace formed part of the manor of Ebury. The marshy ground was watered by the river Tyburn, which still flows below the courtyard and south wing of the palace. Where the river was fordable, the village of Icross grew. Ownership of the site changed hands many times. Owners included Edward the Confessor and his queen consort Edith of Wessex in late Saxon times, and, after the Norman conquest, William the Conqueror. William gave the site to Geoffrey de Mandeville, who bequeathed it to the monks of Westminster Abbey. In 1531, Henry VIII acquired the Hospital of St. James from Eton College, and in 1536 he took the manor of Ebury from Westminster Abbey. These transfers brought the site of Buckingham Palace back into royal hands for the first time since William the Conqueror had given it away almost 500 years earlier. Various owners leased it from royal landlords and the freehold was the subject of frenzied speculation during the 17th century. By then, the old village of Icross had long since fallen into decay, and the area was mostly wasteland. Needing money, James I sold off part of the Crown freehold but retained part of the site on which he established a 4-acre mulberry garden for the production of silk. Clement Walker in Anarchia Anglicana refers to new erected Sodoms and spintrees at the Mulberry Garden at St. James's. This suggests it may have been a place of debauchery. Eventually, in the late 17th century, the freehold was inherited from the property tycoon Sir Hugh Audley by the great heiress Mary Davis. First houses on the site, Goring House, possibly the first house erected within the site was that of a Sir William Blake, around 1624. Your next owner was Lord Goring, who from 1633 extended Blake's house and developed much of today's garden, then known as Goring Great Garden. He did not, however, manage to obtain freehold interest in the Mulberry Garden. Unbeknown to Goring, in 1640 the document failed to pass the Great Seal before King Charles I fled London, which it needed to do for legal execution. Allington House, the improvident Goring defaulted on his rents. Henry Bennet, 1st Earl of Arlington obtained the mansion and was occupying it, now known as Goring House, when it burned down in 1674. Allington House rose on the City the southern wing of today's Palace the next year, and its freehold was bought in 1702. Buckingham House. The house which forms the architectural core of the present palace was built for the first Duke of Buckingham and Normanby in 1703 to the design of William Wynd. The style chosen was of a large, three-floored central block with two smaller flanking service wings. Buckingham House was eventually sold by Buckingham's descendant, Sir Charles Sheffield, in 1761 to George III for £21,000. Like his grandfather, George II, George III refused to sell the Mulberry Garden interest, so that Sheffield had been unable to purchase the full freehold of the site. When Sheffield sold Buckingham House, it came into the hands of the royal family. From Queen's House to Palace, the house was originally intended as a private retreat, and in particular for Queen Charlotte, and was known as the Queen's House. 14 of their 15 children were born there. St James's Palace remained the official and ceremonial royal residence. Remodelling of the structure began in 1762. After his accession to the throne in 1820, George IV continued the renovation with the idea in mind of a small, comfortable home. While the work was in progress, in 1826, the king decided to modify the house into a palace with the help of his architect John Nash. Some furnishings were transferred from Carlton House, and others had been bought in France after the French Revolution. The external four-section aid was designed keeping in mind the French neoclassical influence preferred by George IV. The cost of the renovations grew dramatically, and by 1829, the extravagance of Nash's designs resulted in his removal as architect. On the death of George IV in 1830, his younger brother William IV hired Edward Blore to finish the work. At one stage, William considered converting the palace into the new Houses of Parliament, after the destruction of the existing namesake by fire in 1834. Home of the monarch. Buckingham Palace finally became the principal royal residence in 1837, on the accession of Queen Victoria, who was the first monarch to reside there, as her predecessor William IV had died before its completion. While the staterooms were a riot of gilt and colour, the necessities of the new palace were somewhat less luxurious. For one thing, it was reported the chimneys smoked so much that the fires had to be allowed to die down, and consequently the court shivered in icy magnificence. Ventilation was so bad that the interior smelled, and when a decision was taken to install gas lamps, there was a serious worry about the build-up of gas on the lower floors. It was also said that the staff were lax and lazy and the palace was dirty. Following the Queen's marriage in 1840, her husband, Prince Albert, concerned himself with a reorganization of the household offices and staff, and with the design faults of the palace. The problems were all rectified by the close of 1840. However, the builders were to return within the decade. By 1847, the couple had found the palace too small for court life and their growing family, and consequently the new wing, designed by Edward Blore, was built by Thomas Cubitt, enclosing the central quadrangle. The large east front facing the mall is today the public face of Buckingham Palace and contains the balcony from which the royal family acknowledged the crowds on momentous occasions and annually after trooping the colour. The ballroom wing and a further suite of staterooms were also built in this period, designed by Nash's student Sir James Penneton. Before Prince Albert's death, the palace was frequently the scene of musical entertainments, and the greatest contemporary musicians entertained at Buckingham Palace. The composer Felix Mendelssohn is known to have played there on 3 occasions. Johann Strauss too and his orchestra played there when in England. Strauss's Alice polka was first performed at the palace in 1849 in honour of the Queen's daughter, Princess Alice. Under Victoria, Buckingham Palace was frequently the scene of lavish costume balls, in addition to the routine royal ceremonies, investitures and presentations. Widowed in 1861, the grief-stricken Queen withdrew from public life and left Buckingham Palace to live at Windsor Castle, Balmoral Castle, and Osborne House. For many years the palace was seldom used, and even neglected. In 1864 a note was found pinned to the fence of Buckingham Palace saying, "These commanding premises to be let or sold," in consequence of the late occupants' declining business. Eventually, public opinion forced her to return to London, though even then she preferred to live elsewhere whenever possible. Court functions were still held at Windsor Castle rather than at the palace, presided over by the sombre Queen habitually dressed in mourning black, while Buckingham Palace remained shuttered for most of the year. Interior. The palace measures 108 meters by 120 meters, is 24 meters high and contains over 77,000 am2 of floor space. The principal rooms of the palace are contained on the piano nobile behind the west-facing garden for Section 8 at the rear of the palace. The center of this ornate suite of state rooms is the music room, its large bow the dominant feature of the four Section 8. Flanking the music room are the blue and the white drawing rooms. At the center of the suite, serving as a corridor to link the state rooms, is the picture gallery, which is top-lit and 55 yards long. The gallery is hung with numerous works including some by Rembrandt, Van Dyck, Rubens and Vermeer. Other rooms leading from the picture gallery are the throne room and the green drawing room. The green drawing room serves as a huge anteroom to the throne room, and is part of the ceremonial route to the throne from the guard room at the top of the grand staircase. The guard room contains white marble statues of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, in Roman costume, set in a tribune lined with tapestries. These very formal rooms are used only for ceremonial and official entertaining, but are open to the public every summer. Directly underneath the state apartments is a suite of slightly less grand rooms known as the semi-state apartments. Opening from the marble hall, these rooms are used for less formal entertaining, such as luncheon parties and private audiences. Some of the rooms are named and decorated for particular visitors, such as the 1844 room, which was decorated in that year for the state visit of Emperor Nicholas I of Russia, and, on the other side of the bell room, the 1855 room, in honor of the visit of Emperor Napoleon III of France. At the center of this suite is the bell room, through which thousands of guests pass annually to the Queen's garden parties in the gardens beyond. The Queen uses privately a smaller suite of rooms in the north wing. Between 1847 and 1850, when Blore was building the new East Wing, the Brighton Pavilion was once again plundered of its fittings. As a result, many of the rooms in the new wing have a distinctly Oriental atmosphere. The red and blue Chinese luncheon room is made up from parts of the Brighton banqueting and music rooms, but has a chimney piece designed by W. M. Fietham. The yellow drawing room has wallpaper which had been supplied in 1817 for the Brighton Saloon, and the chimney piece in this room is a European vision of what the Chinese equivalent would look like, complete with nodding mandarins and niches and fearsome winged dragons, designed by Robert Jones. At the center of this wing is the famous balcony, with the center room behind its glass doors. This is a Chinese-style saloon enhanced by Queen Mary, who, working with the designer Sir Charles Allam, created a more binding Chinese theme in the late 1920s, although the lacquer doors were brought from Brighton in 1873. Running the length of the piano nobile of the East Wing is the Great Gallery, modestly known as the Principal Corridor, which runs the length of the eastern side of the quadrangle. It has mirrored doors, and mirrored cross walls reflecting porcelain pagodas and other Oriental furniture from Brighton. The Chinese luncheon room and yellow drawing room are situated at each end of this gallery, with the center room obviously placed in the center. The original early 19th century interior designs, many of which still survive, included widespread use of brightly colored scaglilla and blue and pink lapis, on the advice of Sir Charles Long. King Edward VII oversaw a partial redecoration in a belle-epoque cream and gold color scheme. When paying a state visit to Britain, foreign heads of state are usually entertained by the Queen at Buckingham Palace. They are allocated a large suite of rooms known as the Belgian Suite, situated at the foot of the Minister's Staircase, on the ground floor of the north-facing garden wing. The rooms of the suite are linked by narrow corridors, one given extra height and perspective by saucer domes designed by Nash in the style of Soane. A second corridor in the suite has Gothic-influenced crossover vaulting. The Belgian rooms themselves were decorated in their present style and named after Prince Albert's uncle La copyright Leopold, first king of the Belgians. In 1936, the suite briefly became the private apartments of the palace when they were occupied by Edward VIII. Court ceremonies. Court dress, formerly, men not wearing military uniform would wear knee breeches of an 18th-century design. Women's evening dress included obligatory trains and tiaras or feathers in their hair. The dress code governing formal court uniform and dress has progressively relaxed. After World War I, When Queen Mary wished to follow fashion by raising her skirts a few inches from the ground, she requested a lady-in-waiting to shorten her own skirt first to gauge the king's reaction. King George V was horrified, so the Queen kept her hemline unfashionably low. Following their accession in 1936, King George Virgin Islands U.S. and his consort, Queen Elizabeth, allowed the hemline of daytime skirts to rise. Today, there is no official dress code. Most men invited to Buckingham Palace in the daytime choose to wear service uniform or lounge suits. A minority wear morning coats, and in the evening, depending on the formality of the occasion, black tie or white tie. Presentation of debutantes, court presentations of aristocratic girls to the monarch took place in the throne room. These girls were known as dark copyright debutantes, and the occasion termed their coming out represented their first intra-copyrightee into society. Dark copyright debutantes wore full court dress, with 3 tall ostrich feathers in their hair. They entered, curtsied, performed a choreographed backwards walk and a further curtsy, while maneuvering a dress train of prescribed length. In 1958, the Queen abolished the presentation parties for dark copyright debutantes, replacing them with garden parties. Today, the throne room is used for the reception of formal addresses such as those given to the Queen on her jubilees. It is here on the throne dais that royal wedding portraits and family photographs are taken. Investitures, which include the conferring of knighthoods by dubbing with a sword, and other awards take place in the palace's ballroom, built in 1854. At 36.6 am long, 18 am wide and 13.5 am high, it is the largest room in the palace. It has replaced the throne room in importance and use. During investitures, the Queen stands on the throne dais beneath a giant, domed velvet canopy, which is known as a shamiana or a baldauchin and was used at the coronation Durbar, Delhi in 1911. A military band plays in the musicians' gallery as award recipients approach the Queen and receive their honours, watched by their families and friends. State banquets also take place in the ballroom. These formal dinners take place on the first evening of a state visit by a visiting head of state. On these occasions, 150 or more guests in formal white tie and decorations, including tiaras for women, may dine off gold plate. The largest and most formal reception at Buckingham Palace takes place every November, when the Queen entertains members of the Foreign Diplomatic Corps resident in London. On this occasion, all the staterooms are in use, as the royal family proceed through them beginning through the great north doors of the picture gallery. As Nash had envisaged, all the large, double-mirrored doors stand open, reflecting the numerous crystal chandeliers and sconces, causing a deliberate optical illusion of space and light. Other ceremonies and functions, smaller ceremonies such as the reception of new ambassadors take place in the 1844 room. Here too the Queen holds small lunch parties, and often meetings of the Privy Council. Larger lunch parties often take place in the curved and domed music room, or the state dining room. On all formal occasions the ceremonies are attended by the yeomen of the guard in their historic uniforms, and other officers of the court such as the Lord Chamberlain. Since the bombing of the Palace Chapel in World War II, royal christenings have sometimes taken place in the music room. The Queen's first 3 children were all baptized here. The largest functions of the year are the Queen's garden parties for up to 8,000 invitees in the garden. Modern history. In 1901 the accession of Edward VII saw new life breathed into the palace. The new king and his wife Queen Alexandra had always been at the forefront of London high society, and their friends, known as the Marlborough House set, were considered to be the most eminent and fashionable of the age. Buckingham Palace the ballroom, grand entrance, marble hall, grand staircase, vestibules and galleries redecorated in the Belle Epoque cream and gold colour scheme they retain today once again became a setting for entertaining on a majestic scale. Many people feel King Edward's heavy redecoration of the palace does not complement Nash's original work. The last major building work took place during the reign of King George V when, in 1913, Sir Aston Webb redesigned Blore's 1850 east front to resemble in part Giacomo Leoni's Lime Park in Cheshire. This new, Refaced Principal Force Section 8 was designed to be the backdrop to the Victoria Memorial, a large memorial statue of Queen Victoria, placed outside the main gates. George V, who had succeeded Edward VII in 1910, had a more serious personality than his father. Greater emphasis was now placed on official entertaining and royal duties than on lavish parties. He arranged a series of command performances featuring jazz musicians such as the original Dixieland Jazz Band, the first jazz performance for a head of state, Sidney Bechet, and Louis Armstrong, which earned the palace a nomination in 2009 for a blue plaque by the Brecon Jazz Festival as one of the venues making the greatest contribution to jazz music in the United Kingdom. George V's wife Queen Mary was a connoisseur of the arts, and took a keen interest in the royal collection of furniture and art, both restoring and adding to it. Queen Mary also had many new fixtures and fittings installed, such as the pair of marble Empire-style chimney pieces by Benjamin Valmy, dating from 1810, which the Queen had installed in the ground floor bow room, the huge low room at the centre of the garden for Section 8. Queen Mary was also responsible for the decoration of the Blue Drawing Room. This room, 69 feet long, previously known as the South Drawing Room, has a ceiling designed specially by Nash, coffered with huge gilt console brackets. A book published in 1999 by the Royal Collection Department reported that the palace contained 19 staterooms, 52 principal bedrooms, 188 staff bedrooms, 92 offices, and 78 bathrooms. This is actually small in comparison to the Russian imperial palaces in St. Petersburg and at Tsarskoye Selo, the Papal Palace in Rome, the Royal Palace of Madrid, the Stockholm Palace, or indeed the former Palace of Whitehall, and tiny compared to the Forbidden City and Potala Palace. A minor change was made in 1938, in which the Northwest Pavilion, designed by Nash as a conservatory and altered in 1911 13 to a rackets court, was converted into a swimming pool. During World War I the palace, then the home of King George V and Queen Mary, escaped unscathed. Its more valuable contents were evacuated to Windsor but the royal family remained in situ. The king imposed rationing at the palace, much to the dismay of his guests and household. To the king's later regret, David Lloyd George persuaded him to go further by ostentatiously locking the wine cellars and refraining from alcohol, to set a good example to the supposedly inebriated working class. The workers continued to imbibe and the king was left unhappy at his enforced abstinence. The palace fared worse during World War II. It was bombed no less than 7 times, the most serious and publicized of which resulted in the destruction of the Palace Chapel in 1940. Coverage of this event was played in cinemas all over the UK to show the common suffering of rich and poor. One bomb fell in the Palace Quadrangle while King George Virgin Islands US and Queen Elizabeth were in residence, and many windows were blown in and the chapel destroyed. Wartime coverage of such incidents was severely restricted, however. The King and Queen were filmed inspecting their bombed home, the smiling Queen, as always, immaculately dressed in a hat and matching coat seemingly unbothered by the damage around her. It was at this time the Queen famously declared, "I'm glad we have been bombed. Now I can look the East End in the face." The royal family were seen as sharing their subjects' hardship, as the Sunday Graphic reported. By the editor, the King and Queen have endured the ordeal which has come to their subjects. For the second time a German bomber has tried to bring death and destruction to the home of their majesties. When this war is over the common danger which King George and Queen Elizabeth have shared with their people will be a cherished memory and an inspiration through the years. The damaged palace was carefully restored after the war by John Mowlem and Company. On September 15, 1940, known as the Battle of Britain Day, an RAF pilot, Ray Holmes of No. 504 Squadron RAF rammed a German bomber he believed was going to bomb the palace. Holmes had run out of ammunition and made the quick choice to ram it. Holmes bailed out. Both aircraft crashed. In fact the Dornier Do-17 bomber was empty. It had already been damaged, 2 of its crew had been killed and the remainder bailed out. Its pilot, Feldwebel Robert Zeeby, landed only to die later of wounds suffered during the attack. During the Dornier's descent, it somehow unloaded its bombs, one of which hit the palace. It then crashed into the forecourt of London Victoria Station. The bomber's engine was later exhibited at the Imperial War Museum in London. The British pilot became a King's Messenger following the war, and died at the age of 90 in 2005. On VE Day May 8, 1945 the palace was the centre of British celebrations, with the King, Queen and the Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen, and Princess Margaret appearing on the balcony, with the palace's blacked-out windows behind them, to the cheers from a vast crowd in the mall. The boy Jones was an intruder who gained entry to the palace on 3 occasions between 1838 and 1841 as recorded by Charles Dickens some 40 years later. In 1982, Michael Fagan was able to break into the palace twice, and conversed with the Queen on one of these occasions. Reportedly, Her Majesty maintained her composure while the palace police were en route and Fagan made no threatening motions towards the Queen. The garden, the Royal Mews and the Mall. At the rear of the palace is the large and park-like garden, which together with its lake is the largest private garden in London. Here the Queen hosts her annual garden parties each summer, and also holds large functions to celebrate royal milestones, such as jubilees. It covers 40 acres, and includes a helicopter landing area, a lake, and a tennis court. Adjacent to the palace is the Royal Mews, also designed by Nash, where the royal carriages, including the Gold State Coach, are housed. This Rococo gilt coach, designed by Sir William Chambers in 1760, has painted panels by G. B. Cipriani. It was first used for the state opening of Parliament by George III in 1762 and has been used by the monarch for every coronation since George IV. It was last used for the Golden Jubilee of Elizabeth II. Also housed in the mews are the carriage horses used in royal ceremonial processions. The Mall, a ceremonial approach route to the palace, was designed by Sir Aston Webb and completed in 1911 as part of a grand memorial to Queen Victoria. It extends from Admiralty Arch, across St James's Park to the Victoria Memorial. This route is used by the cavalcades and motorcades of visiting heads of state, and by the royal family on state occasions such as the annual Trooping the Colour. 21st century, royal use and public access. Every year some 50,000 invited guests are entertained at garden parties, receptions, audiences and banquets. The garden parties, usually 3, are held in the summer, usually in July. The forecourt of Buckingham Palace is used for changing of the guard, a major ceremony and tourist attraction. The palace, like Windsor Castle, is owned by the British state. It is not the monarch's personal property, unlike Sandringham House and Balmoral Castle. Many of the contents from Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Kensington Palace and St James's Palace are known collectively as the Royal Collection. Owned by the sovereign, they can, on occasions, be viewed by the public at the Queen's Gallery, near the Royal Mews. Unlike the palace and the castle, the gallery is open continually and displays a changing selection of items from the collection. The rooms containing the Queen's Gallery are on the site of the former chapel, which was damaged by one of the 7 bombs to fall on the palace during World War II. The palace's staterooms have been open to the public during August and September since 1993. The money raised in entry fees was originally put towards the rebuilding of Windsor Castle following the 1992 fire which destroyed many of its staterooms. In May 2009, in response to a request from the Queen to the government for money to carry out a backlog of repairs to the palace, a group of MPs on the Public Accounts Committee proposed that in return for the extra £4 a million in annual funds requested, the palace be open to the public more than the 60 days it is now, as well as when members of the royal family are in residence. The British government currently provides £15 a million yearly for the palace's upkeep. Thus, Buckingham Palace is a symbol and home of the British monarchy, an art gallery and tourist attraction. Behind the gilded railings and gates which were completed by the Bromsgrove Guild in 1911 and Webb's famous 4-sectionade, which has been described in a book published by the Royal Collection as looking like everybody's idea of a palace, is not only the weekday home of the Queen and Prince Philip but also the London residence of the Duke of York and the Earl and Countess of Wessex. The palace also houses the offices of the royal household and is the workplace of 450 people. See also: Changing the Queen's Lifeguard, Flags at Buckingham Palace, List of British royal residences, Notes. References. External links: Buckingham Palace, official website of the British monarchy, Directory of Buckingham Palace's rooms for virtual navigation, account of Buckingham Palace, with Prince of Arlington House and Buckingham House, from Edward Walford, Old and New London, Vol. 4, Chap. 6, account of the acquisition of the Manor of Ebury, from F. H. W. Shepherd, Survey of London, Volume 39, The Grosvenor Estate in Mayfair, Part 1.